Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Voltron Legendary Defender review. Specifically, this is going to be my comic review for Voltron Legendary Defender Series 2, Issue number 4, or Volume 2, Issue number 4. So this is the fourth of 5 issues for this second comic series. Here's the cover by Rubine, the artist. Really nice cover. I really like these kind of more concept based covers where it's just kind of like a nice picture of Voltron and they kind of do something clever with like the colors and stuff like that. So really cool use of the fact that, you know, Voltron's made of so many colors. And then along here you obviously have Keith in red, Lance in blue, Shiro in black, Pidge in green, Hunk in yellow. It just is really nice. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Volume 2 cover, which is like Voltron but made up of kind of the same effect. So I kind of like those very different ideas for comics where like it's fundamentally just like Voltron and then the Paladins on the cover for like every single issue, but it's very unique each time. It's kind of something I wish like the Avatar comics, I'd like to see them do something like that, where there's just a little bit more going on that makes it feel a little bit more like a comic rather than just like characters on the cover. But that's that. Overall, it's an okay issue. It's obviously setting up stuff for issue 5 to be the big finale issue where everything really comes into play. This is just kind of like the final leg of the journey in a way to get to the promised land for the Dabdaho, or however you pronounce their names. These kind of cat people, anthropomorphic cats, who've been kind of accompanying Team Voltron to get to their kind of new lands after the Galra have kind of taken over their other lands. It's been a fairly Hunk-centric comic series up to now, with the two kind of, I suppose, the two princesses more or less of the Dabdaho people, both choosing Hunk to basically like be their husbands basically going forward, because he is the biggest of all of the paladins, because in their culture they respect the people who are the biggest, so they see Hunk as being the most powerful, and so they've kind of chosen him, and he's obviously very like, what? You want me to marry two people that I barely know? But anyway, what happens here is that Hunk's just looking around the ship, and it seems that the two, what are the names? Kuver and Kalar, they've both given Hunk a present, which is this giant egg, and it hatches into one of these kind of, you know, dragon worm things, which are obviously the things that like they've been riding around on in previous issues. These are kind of like mounts basically. So Hunk gets one of them and it kind of starts to chase him. He obviously goes over to the two girls and asks them like, what's it doing? And they reveal to him that this kind of what's the name on this thing again? He thinks you're his Bavada, his rider for life, and you know he's like, oh no, but wait, for life? And suddenly the girls are just like, wait, you're really afraid of like life commitments? And he's like, well, yeah, they're for life. Why wouldn't I be? And so he's asked to name the animal here, and he calls it Herschel, and he reveals that he calls it Herschel because it was his pappy's name. So I don't know if that necessarily means his father or his grandfather, but either way, it means that either Hunk's grandfather or father is named Herschel, which is interesting. But yeah, they're on their way to the Promised Land. They can't wormhole in because Allura is kind of like running low on energy in terms of powering the wormhole stuff. And, you know, the girls are getting more and more like, why won't you choose which one of us you want to marry? And Hunk obviously doesn't want to commit to this at all. So he tries to explain it away. He says like, but I don't think I can marry either of you. You haven't met my mom, and there's this rock girl. And so obviously that's a Shay reference for the first time here. But they're just kind of like, you know, we'll get it in the end. And, you know, they'll arrive at the Promised Lands and erase the shame of Crumpup, who obviously Crumpump is the guy who like betrayed them to the Galra in like some of the previous issues. So just setting up that he's still like a factor. He's ultimately like, in a way, the main villain and kind of why this has happened in the first place. But what happens from here is that there's a bit of an incident where Herschel, Hunk's new kind of dragon rider thing, tries to eat Allura's mice, and she gets really angry at him, and this kind of impresses the two kind of princesses, kind of Kavir and Kavar, because they're like, wow, the Battle Princess is most impressive. For a moment, she was even bigger than Hunk because she gets really annoyed at them. But then the big battle, the typical battle that happens in every one of these issues happens. They all get into the lines because they've encountered basically like a plague of locusts, basically. I don't know if they ever explain exactly what they are. They don't like, I don't think they give a name to them at all. But the idea is we get our double page spread here. Voltron, really cool trail of all the colors here, and then you can see this is meant to be the locusts. And again, they don't really explain what they are. It's just that they're so small, but there's so many of them that they can't really seem to do enough damage, and it's actually having like an impact on them. Like they're like dangerous, and you know they're trying to get everyone to the promised land, and they can't seem to get through. So they kind of realize that they have to open up a wormhole. So Allura is going to have to force this situation here. All the time, like Herschel is in the yellow line with Hunk, kind of causing issues. So he's a little bit clumsy in the battle. But anyway, what they do is that they can't really seem to defeat them all that much. So what ends up happening is that Voltron ends up grabbing all of the Dabdaho ships and throwing them through the wormhole so they can get there as quick as possible. And then they kind of go through the wormhole themselves. And they arrive at the Promised Lands. And we just get this kind of shot of them all arriving there. They don't focus on it too much. It's like this big moment of like they finally arrived back. But then all of a sudden they find all these other Dabdaho there. And they look like they're much kind of gruffer species. Maybe a slightly different kind of species of them. Maybe based on different types of cats. And they summon their king down there to kind of sort everyone out. And he reveals that his name is King Babair, B-A-B-A-Y-R. And he's about to basically attack them. We get up here. He's about to attack them. And then he sees Kuvir and Kavar. And suddenly he's in love with them. And they're in love with him because he's this huge Dabdaho. And they suddenly basically dump Hunk. They don't care about him anymore. And they're all about him. And the king is immediately like, oh, and let my wives' friends go. So he's just immediately on board with this. Hunk is like a little bit like, wow, I'm surprisingly hurt by this. And it's also revealed that Herschel has chosen King Babair as well. So he's Herschel has abandoned him as well. So we ended with just the idea of like they're thanked for escorting them to the Promised Land. And then they look up and there's Galra ships up in the sky. And this is where we get the Galra kind of soldier from before, who was like a cliffhanger at the end of one of the previous issues. And this is Crumphuck here. And he says, I told you they'd be here, and those sucker paladins cleared out all the monsters on the way. So the last issue is going to be this big confrontation in the Promised Land. The Galra are here. There's going to be some big confrontation with Crumphuck. I assume Kuvir and Kavar, and probably with assistance from Babair, will all fight Crumphuck and probably get the victory in that fight. And it will be like, oh, they found their husband at last or something like that. And they'll defeat him while Team Voltron, the Paladins, defeat the Galra. I'm wondering if there will be any sort of like impact coming the end of this, or will it just be like a kind of very isolated incident? So like overall it was a solid enough issue. I think it started off quite rough, this arc. The first issue wasn't very good, but it's picked up definitely with issue 2, 3 and now 4. And I think just the pace of the releases has helped as well. The fact that they released 2 and 3 in the same week, and then it was only 2 weeks later that issue 4 is coming out, and then it's only, I think, 2 more weeks until issue 5 comes out. So the accelerated release has definitely helped this, because I think this would be a really disappointing kind of read if it was a month between every single one of these issues. But like, it's okay. I like that they're, instead of like what the first Voltron comic series did, was it kind of gave an issue to each character in a way. I kind of like that it's just kind of like Hunk is like the focus of this arc for the most part. The others get little bits and pieces here and there, but it's just like Hunk is for the most part the focus here. And it gives little bits and pieces. You know, you have him talking about his family a little bit more, which gives you a little bit more insight into him. The new species here, the Dabdaho, which has been the focus of this arc, is unique. You know, cat people, and the idea that their planet was taken from them, but they have this kind of other place that they go to. It's kind of like this legendary place, and they finally arrive there. It's cool. The last issue, of course, needs more explanation, I feel, about, you know, who these people are, because they very much rush the introduction of the king and the people who are currently living on the Dabdaho, the Promised Lands, because they don't seem to know each other for the most part. There is one of the guys who kind of looks like he's maybe like infected with like quintessence or something like that. So there might be some sort of an influence of like Galra here, in the same way that like the king obviously has these kind of green spots on him. So I don't know if that's meant to mean anything, because like he does look very different than the two kind of the girls who like obviously look more like kind of standard cats, and they're just like individual colors, whereas he's like spotty and like they all look kind of much kind of darker skinned and stuff like that. But yeah, that's the issue. Solid enough, but I think it's definitely kind of falling a little bit into the trap of very much coming across as just a tie-in comic, that like there's nothing really of note happening in this one. Whereas like say the Avatar comics that are being released, while not always telling the most amazing story, they're always, you know, adding new stuff to the characters and so on, that it feels important. It hasn't quite happened here, so I'm hoping if they continue into a volume 3, that they, you know, they choose a time period that will allow for kind of bigger things to happen. I'd like a comic set when Shiro's gone, because once again, this series takes place between episode 116, The Secret of Shiro's Escape, and 117, Greening the Cube. So there's kind of like a bit of an option there. Like they'd have to skip ahead a good bit into the seasons, but I feel that that's an okay thing to do. I like for a series to be set, you know, during the time when Shiro's actually missing in between seasons. That would be a nice time period, because it'd deal with the group at a different kind of formation. That, or else you like maybe decide like to tell like a Lotor story or something like that. Actually use some of the characters that aren't developed and tell a story with them. Don't feel the need to always have it just be focused on, oh, we have to have a giant Voltron battle in every single one of these issues, because action's cool and all, but if there's no meaning behind the action, if you don't actually care about the event happening, then the action is kind of pointless in a way, because it's in a comic specifically, the action is, it's only so good. In that the big standouts from these issues so far has definitely been like the kind of the big double page spreads of like the action happening. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it so far. I hope it ends well. I will be reviewing the final issue when it comes out, which I believe is scheduled to come out on the like, what is this, 28th or 29th, whichever one of those is a Wednesday. It's kind of Wednesday in 2 weeks. And yeah, I'll review it then and kind of give some final thoughts on this second arc. And hopefully we'll get confirmation if there is going to be a third arc or not. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.